Hi everyone, welcome to week week 3 of the course that we're in together, and I guess it's week 2 of the lectures. And so I hope your week is going well, and so today I'm going to talk about the readings that we'll be talking about next week in class on Tuesday during the Zoom. And it is going to be opening up the work that we're going to really be doing this semester together and cracking open the chest of all the tools and toys that the teaching curriculum here at ISU engages in. And it's a historical, process, which is to say that there's a lot of different engagements with previous thinkers and all sorts of fun foundational work there. But we're not going to get too much into that. We're just going to deal with the concepts that chat puts out there for us. And chat is the name for the theory and practice that undergirds the writing curriculum here at ISU. And it stands for Cultural Historical Activity Theory. And so it's building off an existing line of work called activity theory. And we're not going to get too much into that right now, but we'll see in the concepts how central activity is to everything and how it all kind of expands and contracts at times from activity. And also we're going to foreground socialization and ecology very deeply in this reading of it. So the work for this week was a couple different readings and excerpts and things, and the first one that we'll talk about is kind of the dumping out of the terms and concepts. And there were two articulations of that I put out there for you. One was put out there by Pryor and some other writers and is more the foundation for what becomes our engagement with it. But I wanted to put that out there as one way of looking at these terms. And we see it on the screen right there. I've set up the screen to kind of include some of the documents that we'll be dealing with. And so the one side will change based on the document. It'll go from the concepts to an excerpt later on, but also we're going to keep up the map of the concepts on the screen so that we can keep an eye towards that relationship, because it's central to everything that we're going to do. So we're going to look at the document about the concepts, focusing in on the part of the document that is from Joyce Walker. And I excerpted this from an article called Just Chatting. And Joyce Walker is a professor in the writing program here, who you may have at some point if you continue taking writing courses. And Dr. Walker is a former director of the writing program, and she helped bring in chat as the driving curriculum here at ISU. So, maybe before we get into actually looking at the terms, let's look at this map over here. And in the map, we can see the text in the middle. And as we're doing this, I want us to kind of compare in our heads with our own experience of how a text is produced. I think typically we come from, without going into the history, because a whole class could be delving into the history of rhetoric and the way that we previously engaged writing. And we'll talk about this Tuesday together, but I do want to foreground this by saying it was much more of a author-centered way of looking at writing, where we had the writer or the author, and then we had the audience, which we could look at as you here, and it was very isolated and separated, and it didn't take into account the multiplicity of the way the text comes to be, so that it was covering over a whole massive process that was going into the act before the author, the individual, writes the text and then delivers it to the audience. So we're going to kind of disrupt that triangle that represents the old way of writing. And it had many consequences, some of which we'll deal with as we go through. So looking at the map, we have the text in the center, and we have all those different relationships to it, to the text. So all those things that are going into the production, what we call the production of the text. And one of the reasons why I like to highlight socialization in ecology is because of the way that whole process, representation, distribution, reception, socialization, activity, ecology, production, representation, all these things form a socialization that makes an ecology or a new environment that is the environment that we exist in when we make a particular text. So there are different points of emphasis, right, that each of these take on based on the particular project that we're doing. And we'll look at this in particular as the way that genre is produced, right? Like the different ways that we take these things up, and the emphases on different modes. Modes is a word that we've talked about before that we're going to keep on talking about, and the different modes that we take up in the course of this process come together to make the genre that we are hoping the composition or writing or text makes. So what's a genre, right? A genre is a category on a basic level, right? It's a type. It's a kind. Etymologically, it goes back to, I forgot to write this down, but the Greek for type, for kind. However, it also has a root in generate, in Genesis. So we can see that it's not about strict adherence to a rigid category, although it can be. And certainly, if we look at our previous experience with writing, which we can talk about together on Tuesday, but our specific experience of writing, we were taught that there's one good writing, and it is usually posited as academic writing, scholarly writing, and that's good writing. Whether or not we say that outright or not, that's what's being posited when we teach people the very narrow conception of writing that we're taught. And there are many reasons why this is done. Some say simplicity, right? The 5-paragraph essay is something that's given to us out of simplicity or directness. And one of the things that we highlight here at ISU is that this cuts out the messiness of the process, the necessary messiness of the process. And, like an article that Dr. Walker wrote, and we'll probably look at it at some point, shit is complicated. And we're not going to cover that up. So as we look at this map, we see that there are a whole range of things that go into the making process. And it's a lot more than what we were taught before in the singular genre of writing that we were looking at. And so we're going to look at a whole range of genres in this course. Not just, I don't even think we're going to look at necessarily scholarly writing. That's not to say we're not going to engage with resources that are typically thought about as scholarly writing, right? Like, academic articles, books, journals, a whole range of things that are typically thought about as legitimate sources. But, in looking at Twitter or memes, things like that, it's things that are seemingly more casual in their genre. And by casual, I mean maybe not as rigorous. But we want to interrupt that and say that that's not true. Academic writing, scholarly writing is not only it's not only not the only kind of writing that's good. The things that we think of as going into good writing or scholarly writing, right, those kind of sources, can be used in a whole array of genres. Like, so on Twitter, right, if you're making a Twitter thread and you're trying to communicate an argument to somebody, you can bring into play a whole range of modalities, right, and different genres themselves, like film, song, academic articles, poetry, journals, and you can make images out of some of these things, right? We can screen cap things and isolate different parts of those articles and make images of those. So there's a whole range of things that can go into play modality-wise. And the different kinds of modality that I wanted to say, that I meant to say earlier, that go into the production of genre are oral, which are sonic, or kind of the things that we can hear. Spatial, right, the relationships between things. And that can happen on the page, or something that's on the page that makes us make a spatial relationship to something else that's not on the page. And the same with oral or sonic, right? There can be something that's transmitted in an image that produces a sound in our head, right? Like if we see someone, swinging an axe at a tree, right? We anticipate the sound of that axe hitting the tree. And so there's a production of sound there, even though it's not film. So then there's the visual, of course, which we've described. There's gestural, in terms of like a screen cap of me right now, you can see that I'm gesturing, right? Or there are ways that images or things can gesture metaphorically, right, outside of the image, right? So that's the beauty of these things. These creations, these compositions, right? They never stay inside themselves, even though sometimes they're created to stay inside themselves. We always want to take them elsewhere, and there's always this pushing against the edges of of genre and of boundaries, and so, yeah, the gestural indicates that. And then also, of course, we have alphabetic. Right, so like in this image of the map, we have some alphabetic text that makes the sentences, that tells us, here's the word distribution, right? And then some words below that explain distribution. And, but that alphabetic text is above some symbols that also contain some alphabetic text. And it comes together to produce an overall image. So there's a sequence of images that come together to make the alphabetic text that then makes this overall image that I screen capped and gave for us right there to look at. So we can see the integration or the movement already, right? We can already see the major emphasis of chat is in relations, right? It's not in this sort of discrete or isolated creator, and then the creator that makes this thing out of myself and then produces it and gives it to an audience of some kind. There's a whole range of activity that goes into the production process, the making process, way prior to the creation, the actual like making of a thing, right? There's the planning, there's the antecedent experience that provides an impetus for me to even do the thing, and that's something we'll look at. The fact that when we go to make something, it's because we were an audience before. We're an audience already as we're making it. So the relationship between audience and creator is not a separate one. In fact, we take up making, we take up writing because we are an audience, because we read, because something is delivered to us and we want to engage with it. So it's about relations. And how we relate to the world and the choices we make to engage in something dictates the emphasis of the different modes and how we take up those modes in the process of engaging with different genres. And genres, right, are pre-existing. We enter them already, and that's something we're going to talk about, especially when we talk about and we bring into play the reading from the previous week, and we carry that forward about language being a set of instructions and commands. And how do the construction of genres reproduce those commands in different ways? How can genres highlight those commands? How can genres mask those demands? Right? Because one of the major ways that demands and commands are masked is in everyday life, is in the presentation of themselves as natural and internal and not even a command at all, right? So we follow them without knowing that we're being commanded. So we have the map up there, and we have the terms. And on Tuesday, we're going to talk together about what we think about these terms and how they relate to each other and how they relate to our own previous experience of writing, but also maybe our own previous experience of these words and these concepts, because that's what they are. So we're going to talk a little bit about Dr. Walker's definitions of these terms, and then we're going to look at a little bit of problematizing about what is a concept at all, because I think we should abstract for a little bit. And that's part of the work of seeing how these things operate on us and through us so that we can interrupt that process and actually make something new and create something inaugural, right? Like Derrida posited for us last week. Something fresh and genuinely a reorganization of existing materials. And so the concepts and the fact that they're never singular and they're always in relation, and that's where their power lies, is something we're going to talk about in the middle section. And then at the end, we'll talk a little bit about the genre reading that we had for this week. But I'm going to focus mostly on the first two sections, and then we'll talk about the genre reading in class a little bit more. So in the beginning here, we want to dump out the terms, all the toys, because the concepts are toys and tools for play, and it's how we think. When we're thinking, we're using these concepts, these unifications of meaning, in order to then make larger statements about meaning in the world in relation to our experience. A very simple, I don't know, the table's always in front of me, so I'm always looking at the table for these examples, right? The concept of a table is its definition, right? Is its practical function. It holds things. It stands up. And in its standing up, it holds things. There are different characteristics that usually make up tables, but they're not inherent to the table. What's inherent to the table is that it holds things. You can place things on top of it, and it will hold it. And we made this up. We made up the table because we needed something to hold things. And so we create these representations, one of which is representation, to embody things that are already happening in the world, so that in creating these concepts or ways of understanding the world, we can then transform the world and do different things and new things. But we should also keep in mind that these concepts are created in power structures that don't want us to create new things. They want us to keep doing the same old and to reproduce the world the way it is. And we're here to intervene on that. We're here to stop that process and disturb it and to do something different. So we're just going to go through this list here. And I want to highlight in the beginning the relationship between all these things and socialization and ecology, because all of these different processes come together to make a process of socialization that is what allows the production of whatever we're trying to do. So that the way we engage all these concepts and the emphases we place or don't place is its own specific micro process and micro ecology, right? The way we engage all these different things makes a very specific environment that we are trying to engage with the old environment, the world as it is. So we're going to go through these, and Dr. Walker starts with production. And I'm going to read some sentences from these things, from this writing, and then unpack some of them, and we'll move through it that way. So Dr. Walker writes, production deals with the means through which a text is produced. Production also considers the genres and structures that can contribute to and even pre-shape our ability to produce a text. So Dr. Walker is using the example of the job application. And the production of that text is something we enter into that's already in existence, right? We didn't make the form that we're filling out for the job application. The form is given to us. And the form comes out of a culture and society that has particular norms and standards about what they ask when they're seeking employment, right? Even the very idea of the fact that we need to apply for a job presents to us the fact that this is a world in which you need to, it's not given to you, right? The work is not given to us. We need to compete in some way, or there's a chance of rejection. And so there's that level of the production. And then there's also the fact of having a pencil or a pen or having access to the internet to fill it out online. That goes into the production. That's the means through which the text is produced. The tools, the internet, the pencil, the previous experience, right? Because we need previous experience to fill out the job application, usually, right? We know that from filling out jobs. Everything requires previous experience. Even entry-level jobs require previous experience. So that's kind of the production. It's the means through which a text is produced. And that includes physical things like the pencil, right, or internet access, or a seat to sit on to fill it out. And we can already see that this also includes other concepts that we'll talk about in the class, which is something like antecedent experience or antecedent knowledge. What we bring to the table, our experience filling out other job applications, our experience filling out job applications for jobs in that particular field. Maybe we've applied in different fields. So there's a whole range of things that go into play there. They're not just tools or the physical tools, although the tools are part of it. We're trying to think, though, about the specific conditions and the specific tools that follow certain practices that go into the negotiation of the ways in which a text or a composition is made. So, looking at representation, the term representation highlights issues related to the way that the people who produce a text conceptualize and plan it. So it shows the way in which the organization of the text, the actual production of it, right, when we sit down to make it, is not something that comes out of nowhere, poof. It is something that is itself a part of a process. And some people like to say the end of the process. I don't like to say that because I'm against endings. Because they give us too much comfort, a false comfort in something being over with. And nothing is over with, in my opinion. Nothing is ever over with, as much as sometimes we'd like it to be. So, in this case, representation calls us to look at the pre-planning and the organization that goes into the actual making process. So, it's not just getting the books from the library or downloading a PDF onto your computer, although that's part of it. It's, getting the mouse to use the computer to get there. It's taking the bus. It's looking at the bus schedule. It's stopping to get lunch beforehand, but not too much lunch because you get tired after lunch and you want to do work, right? So these things are all in interplay with each other already. It's already happening. There's no such thing as something that's by itself. And this also includes, I do want to highlight this also includes the different ideas of research, of our conception of things that go into play to think about that come into play to influence how we even think about research, right? So this is a great example where we think about research as only going to a library, right? When research can clearly be just existing. It doesn't even need to be research taken up for itself as research, although it's important that we do think to ourselves, okay, I'm going to research right now. But also, some of the best discoveries in research come about when we're not necessarily doing the looking on purpose. So conceptualization and planning is not always intentional, right? Sometimes we find ourselves in the living and we're able to make the generative planning from just the living and coming upon something in surprise. So the next one is distribution, and this is thinking really about the who, the what, another what, and also how, right? So it thinks about, like Dr. Walker writes, the consideration of who a text is given to, for what purposes, and using what kind of distribution tools. So we're thinking about audience here. We're thinking about audience not as a static place, but as a moving thing that's always changing, even as we're deciding it. And it's changing based on our choices, right? We don't start off by saying necessarily who we want to give it to. We think about how is the text coming into us? How is it moving into us already as the audience? And then how do we want to redirect that using what kind of means, right? Are we going to make an audio recording? Are we going to make a poster? Are we going to make a video? Are we going to write a text about it? Are we going to do a couple of these things together, right? Am I going to take a picture and then make a text? It's how do we get the idea out there? How do we get the work out there? And that's linked to, of course, representation and production and the other modes. The other concepts. Distribution is related. It's how we, representation and how we think about the planning and organizing is related to the distribution. It's how we decide how to distribute it. So reception carries this forward and carries the audience aspect forward and thinks about how a text is taken up and used by others, how it's received by our audience. And so it not only anticipates how they're going to receive the content, it literally is considering how are they going to receive it. If I'm sending an image, if the text is an image, it takes up the modality of, visuality, but also maybe other modes too, right? Orality and gestural. If I'm sending an image, how am I going to send it? And how does if I'm sending it via email, differ from if I'm sending it via a direct message on Twitter to somebody? And of course, there are different unintentional consequences, right, in using these different modes. But thinking about those unintended consequences are how we think about the production process and how we think of the different modes we're going to take up or don't take up. What do we want, or how do we want the audience to receive it? And this segues nicely into socialization, because this brings together the production, distribution, and usage of texts. So it's the movement, and also moment, series of moments, of all these concepts in relation. It's how we take them all up in order to make the text. And in the taking up of all the concepts, we produce a certain ecology or environment that we'll talk about in a second. But it's impossible to talk about these things without getting ahead of ourselves. So socialization it's how we are engaged in the practice of representing and transforming the different kind of social and cultural practices. So it brings into play our antecedent experience and knowledge and the antecedent world, the world that we're entering, the environment of the world that is making us make this thing. So it's the kind of introduction of a new environment to the overall world and how that comes to be. So, but it also is, on another level, socialization is the way in which cultural norms and antecedent worlds are delivered to us, right? We were socialized to believe that the essay and the good writing is scholarly writing, academic writing, a 5-paragraph essay. And this is writing. And so socialization can be seen as the way we're conditioned in the world to have certain values and to construct certain hierarchies of prioritization of what's important. Right? The 5-paragraph essay told us something was important. And let's think about what that is. What were the values given to us about writing before this? That's a question I want us to think about. What are the commands implicit in a 5-paragraph essay? Literally, what is it asking you to do? Let's think about that. And what doesn't fit in those commands? So, looking at activity is something we've already been talking about, right? It's something I'm doing right now already, ever since I started talking. And before, when I wrote notes. It encompasses the actual practices that people engage as they create or make a text, writing, drawing, walking. Thinking about activity this way allows us to focus on the actions that are actually happening, right? The actions that make up the production of the work we're trying to do. It's the actual recording of the alphabetic text. It's the taking of the screenshots and bringing them together to make an argument in and amongst alphabetic text and any other things. So activity is something that's always happening, and it can be in conflict with other things, as Dr. Walker talks about, or indifference, right? So activity is not necessarily the continuing of something. Activity can be our interruption or disturbance of an existing process, or a non-cooperation, refusing to participate in an activity that's already ongoing. So in this case, we see that the absence of our action is actually material. It interrupts the ongoing process of making that's going on. So we can look at this in a couple different ways, right? People that boycott, right? Or go on strike, that's an attempt to disrupt or stop a particular text. What's that text? The text is, you can look at it in a couple different ways. The text is the production of that business that's making the profits, right, that show up on a ledger, on a piece of paper. And so there's different ways to look at texts here, right? That ledger of an accountant that makes up and records the profits of a business is a text that's being interrupted when workers go on strike. And indifference, I don't like to call indifference because I think that it's actually not maybe the way to look at it. I think it's actually a high degree of attentiveness that leads to our decision to not cooperate with a particular process. Like when we don't pay attention to curfew laws, because curfew laws are ways of telling us when and where we can protest or use our free speech rights. So the ecology is, it can be environmental, it can be biological forces, right, that exist beyond the boundaries of the text, right? Like if we're going to meet together and we're going to meet outside, because it's socially distancing, and we're going to meet outside to talk about this group project, but it's raining, right? So the ecology is coming into play to change our process in some way. And this can also be if someone is sick, right? Biological forces are coming into play to affect the text and the way that we can go into the activity process and make the text or not make the text. This can also be chronic illness, right? Biological forces are coming into play to give us our own perspective on particular texts that are in the world. I also like to think about this though as ecology is the practical part of actual production. And so it's the way that we were just talking about, but it's also the environment that we create in the particular ways that we engage representation, production, activity, ecology itself, socialization, distribution, perception. All these concepts come to play to make a particular ecology of our own, a microecology that engages the macroecology of the world and seeks to change it in some way, and to make it different, and to bring something new, and to disrupt it or disturb it. So these are the concepts. And at this point, I'm going to switch over to this other document, the What is a Concept? With some excerpts from our friend Gilles Deleuze and Felix Guattari, who we engaged last week. Excellent. So, and again, these are difficult writings, but I brought them in here because I want us to really disturb our notions of concepts and to think about them in the way that Chat is putting them out there and the way that Deleuze and Guattari put them here. And I think that's compatible. I think it's compatible the way that we're looking at it here in Chat as well as in Deleuze and Guattari. And I'm just going to look at a couple of these examples and we'll pull them out on Tuesday and see what struck y'all or what didn't strike y'all. But I think it will hopefully be clear in a confusing way why we're looking at this. So right off the bat, the first excerpt that I made here is there are no simple concepts. Pardon me. There are no simple concepts. Every concept has components and is defined by them. It therefore has a combination. I don't speak French, but chiffre, we'll say. It is a multiplicity, although not every multiplicity is conceptual. There is no concept with only one component. And I think we see that here, right, in the conceptual map. And in the discussion that I just embarked on earlier, to show that these things are always already interrelated. And the components of one involve the components of another. So that ecology and socialization are always inextricably linked. Not only do processes of socialization make ecologies and environments, the previously existing environment goes into play to create the world in which our process of socialization that we undertake when we make a text is engaging in. And in the next one, when they talk about the firstness of a concept, the firstness is always whichever one strikes us first, or whichever one we pick up first. There's no right way. The key is that they are connected to problems, as we see in the second example. On what conditions is a concept first? Not absolutely, but in relation to another. All concepts are connected to problems without which they would have no meaning, and which can themselves only be isolated or understood as their solution emerges. And the solution here is the writing that we take up, or the composition we take up. It's not a final solution. It's always something that's ongoing. The etymology of resolution and solution is, in fact, to untie. It is not to tie up, right? Or to put in a box and say, well, we've solved it. We're done with this now. So every concept has a history also, right? Not only a larger social history that comes into play to create different ideas of production, ecology, activity, socialization, all the different things. It zigs and zags. It moves in different ways. And that's why we want to have this process like the map articulates. Because there is no clean way to look at concepts that we want to use in writing or anywhere. It's always messy. And they all have histories. Larger histories that span centuries, and then the ways that those histories come into us and follow us, are socialized into us, right? Are received by us, right? And we receive them because they were distributed in different ways. And those distributions happen in different environments. The school, the family, the church. On the other hand, a concept also has a becoming that involves its relationship with concepts situated on the same plane. Here, concepts link up with each other, support one another, coordinate their contours, articulate their respective problems. So what does this mean? It's tough. I like to think about the plane as being something like that, like an expansion of this sheet of paper that is connecting all these different concepts together, right? It's a consistency that allows them all to be understandable. And they're all only understandable through each other. We need all the concepts all the time. That's why I'm dumping all the tools out right now, all the toys, so we can play with them and figure out how we like to play with them. Because they need to link up with each other. That's why they're there. That's how they exist. They not only support each other, but they support us. as we use them in different ways. And they have different definitions, of course, different contours, different shapes. And the way that we use them in this way helps us to articulate different problems that the concepts themselves are in response to. And we'll talk about that. But especially the ways that we've been socialized to write in the past and to read in the past. Those socializations or conditionings that we undertook or that were taken on us were in response to social problems. We're taught writing in a particular way because of political problems and things that the government or the socioeconomic system, capitalism, wants to solve. Why is language produced in us as commands? Right? Why is that? Why do we think about writing as good writing, and why is that so narrow as academic writing, scholarly writing, the 5-paragraph essay? What does that serve? What problem does that serve for society? But the key is to see all these things as participating in co-creation. All these concepts come together to participate in co-creation, not to solve problems, to confront problems, to see if the problems are true problems or false problems. So, every concept relates back to other concepts, not only in its history, but in its becoming, and in what it's doing right now in the world. And every concept has components that in itself are concepts, right? The way that socialization includes all of these concepts. Activity, production, representation, distribution, reception, ecology. All those things come together to make the socialization process that is then spun forward on us. And so they relate back to each other. They're relays. They're never stopping in this process. And they're centers of vibrations, as Deleuze and Guattari say here. Right? They all exist discretely, but they're all in relation to the others. And in that relationship, they vibrate and they live. And so much of the way we've engaged these concepts have not been vibrations. They've been unmoving and monuments. And in those monuments, they are commands to us. Distribute it this way. Go under and do this one kind of process of research in order to make this one kind of text. So they're not vibrating. And it's a forced coherence. What does that mean? That means that the coherence comes to make that statue so that we can see it as a statue. And it's there. It's not moving. It's some sort of final unity. And we are standing against that. You know, like Deleuze and Guattari say here, they do form a wall. Concepts do form a wall. But they hold together along lines that are diverging and moving. And there are bridges between the concepts, but they're always provisional. They are movable. So we always want things to be provisional and in movement, because as much as we take actions, we recognize we're taking actions based on a set of conditions that are in movement, and that we can assess later on in terms of how well our action was able to make the kind of composition or making that we tried to do in the beginning. I like this at the end here. If a concept is better than an earlier one, it is because it makes us aware of new variations and unknown resonances. It carries out unforeseen cuttings out. And so that I think we can see that better here is correlated with how much we emphasize each of these concepts, and then in that emphasis of all the concepts, we're able to discover new connections and new vibrations, new resonances in the concepts themselves and in the relations. So that these concepts form, as Deleuze says here, a constellation of an event to come. Not only inside the particular concept, which contains other concepts, right? All these concepts contain each other within them. And that's a constellation of the event to come, which is this text. And the concepts have these new events inside them already, the potential of them. And it's how we engage these concepts that is able to bring forward that event, that newness, that writing, that freshness that is the inaugural act of writing. And I want to end here on this difficult passage because I think it shows the role of socialization in ecology. And it's a tough one. Concepts are, it's fun little poetry, but it's tough. Concepts are the archipelago or skeletal frame, a spinal column rather than a skull, whereas the plane is the breath that suffuses the separate parts. One thing I want to pull out of this is later on when he says, concepts are concrete assemblages, right? And that brings into play that these are things that we assemble together, and we emphasize the different concepts based on what we want to make. They're material. They're not abstract. They're very material. They're concrete. And they're things we come together to bring together to make in an assemblage. Right? The concepts themselves are assemblages insofar as they have different concepts inside them that we emphasize or de-emphasize based on what we're doing to make an event of the text. And this all comes into play to make our own process of socialization and to make our own ecology, our own micro-socialization and our own micro-ecology. That is the way that we are engaging the previous world, right? The world as it is, in the present. And that is a future act, right? It's us in the present grabbing the future and saying, yeah, we're going to create something new here. And we're not just going to recreate the past. And so that was looking at the Deleuze and Guattari that we had for this week, our weekly Deleuze. And I'm going to end here in a second, but I want to talk briefly about the reading that I put out there from Tyler Kostecki on understanding language and culture with cultural historical activity theory, with chat. So that we're talking about genre just for a second, and I want to know your thoughts on the readings before and the concepts and how well this reading engages those ideas, or doesn't. So that genre is, right, a category that pre-exists, right? We are taking it up knowingly that it exists already, and it's a type or a kind of composition. And the genre contains different modes that make it the modes, how we take up the modes makes the genre. And those modes are, again, orality, spatiality, visuality, gesturality, and alphabetic, right? And the different ways that we emphasize those or don't is how we take up a genre. But we always take up a genre in reference to what it already is beforehand. And so it requires some sort of antecedent experience or knowledge of what those genres are. And how to cue to somebody, oh, this is the genre that it's in. And sometimes you can't even do the genre without being inside of it, right? Like a Twitter thread. You have to be on Twitter to do that. Although maybe we're going to simulate how to do that. Or a meme. You have to be making a meme to know the structure of the meme. And to know, a meme is a great example. That's why we're going to take it up soon. Because it requires you to know the way that we all engage the cues of the meme and what those signs indicate to us, right? Like when we're looking at the is this a pigeon one, right? Where it has three components. It has the person, the pigeon, and then the question, right? And so we could say me, and then I guess to make a meme on the spot, a meme would be, high school writing would be the me, the person, and then the pigeon would be academic writing, and then the question at the bottom would be, is this good writing? So the way we engage genre brings into play the questions of format and audience and research and layout and purpose that bring into play all these questions of production, representation, distribution, reception. And the goal here is not so that we understand all these concepts perfectly right now. Hell no, definitely not. The goal is to dump them all out and to say, here they are. And how do they intersect with and confront and conflict with our existing knowledge or experience with writing, and also our experience with these words and concepts, if we have an experience with them. And so I hope that we've been able to see that, and we'll work with this more, because it's clear. I'm trying to make things clear, but in their clarity, show how they're confusing, and be okay with the confusion and messiness. So thank you all for listening, and I'm going to just close with this final section that I forgot to read, but is so great. And where is it? Huh. I thought I just had this. But I wanted to end with it because I thought it was powerful. Here it is. And it's that concepts are bricks, right? Concepts are weapons and tools. And I want us to think about them that way, because they're things that are being used on us already. And our goal in this class is to start using the concepts for our own good, not just to make the world as is, but to make a better world and to make a better self, right? And to start thinking about things outside of the way that they're delivered to us and given to us in ways that oftentimes don't make our lives better. So Deleuze, I'm going to end with this little section, and we'll talk more later. A concept is a brick. It can be used to build the courthouse of reason, or it can be thrown through the window. What is the subject of the brick? The arm that throws it? The body connected to the arm? The brain encased in the body? The situation that brought brain and body to such a juncture? All and none of the above. What is its object? The window? The edifice? The laws the edifice shelters? The class and other power relations encrusted in the laws? All and none of the above. What interests us are the circumstances. Because the concept, in its unrestrained usage, is a set of circumstances at a volatile juncture. So I want us to think about concepts as things that are being used on us as weapons and things that we need to start picking up as weapons in the world. So thank you all for listening. And as always, let's talk more very soon on Tuesday. Have a great weekend.